So look guys, LT here. Today I'm going to be giving a little presentation I made on the trucker convoys. I'm going to be talking about why I am not so buddy-buddy with the truckers present there like other people. Specifically a lot of patriotic socialists, okay? I watched Caleb Maupin stream a while ago. He was basically tearing at the eye, he was giving a bow. Everyone was kneeling when the truckers came through and protested the COVID mandates. But there's actually a lot more than meets the eye, and I'm going to be talking about it, especially as someone who has pretty much been around the trucking industry his entire life. Someone who's a lot of my family support has came through driving rigs. So I will just talk about why um, there's more to the eye than it seems. So yeah. First of all, let's talk about the context of the protest. Now, the truck drivers are protesting by blocking important roads and ports against COVID vaccine mandates and possible passports. Now, what does this mean? Well, first of all, we got to talk about who the drivers are, right? Because, like I just said, there's a lot of moralizations around these drivers. There's a lot of, just raw kind of entry level, no thought populism put in. Truck driving is a really bad job for those of you guys who don't know. Especially when you first get into the industry, it's terrible. You're often doing what's called over the road driving, which are driving basically 3 weeks on and 3 days off. Um, for about a year, maybe 2 years, especially if you owe the company money. And another thing is you're often working 11-hour days driving straight. So, yeah, it's a pretty bad job. But these drivers are first Petit Bourgeois, okay? Because all of these trucks present are actually private property. All of these trucks present are actually the private capital of all of these, what are called owner operators. Okay. They all seek to hire workers and exploit by paying their workers with the cents per mile system. So I will talk about that a few slides down. But another thing is they're also all actually labor aristocrats, and I'll discuss that further. And hey, I even have a quote from Engels on this, so strap in. First of all, how are these poor innocent truckers petit bourgeois? Now, first of all, in the background, I just found a generic picture of a family trucking business, but basically, all of these trucks at the protest are private property and they are solely capital. Now, I've had this argument with default like 700 million times. The difference between a privately contracted truck driver and a privately contracted Uber driver is that in a lot of cases, the Uber driver has their car, which is just their personal vehicle, to which they turn into capital. Okay. But the difference between forcing you to sell your own personal means of transportation for a few dollars and buying a fucking big rig is very obvious, okay? Because big rigs are solely capital, all right? Now, you can drive big rigs two ways. You can drive them for a company or you can own one and create your own family company. That would make you what's called an owner operator. And a lot of these owner operators are trying to form their own trucking companies and hire workers to retire from driving because truckers don't want to drive their entire lives. Okay, some people do want to drive forever until they die, but most truckers want to be with their families. It's a very isolating job. You're not going to see your kids grow up. So they're going to form, Bob and Sally's trucking company, and they're going to hire on new commercial driver's license owners, and they're going to exploit the shit out of them. Okay. And their workers are going to be exploited with unfair industry practices like the cents per mile system. I didn't put it in here, but they're also going to lack detention pay. And I'll talk about those two a couple slides down. But basically, as we all know, as Marxists, the creation of this middle class and the creation of this labor aristocracy is one of the main reasons why socialism has met such a detriment in the West. And it's really because of this idea of the working class bathing themselves in this middle class liberalism, right? This idea of earning a good living and progressing up in the liberal social ladder. When in reality, it's all bullshit and it's all just an excuse to become a capitalist and to become a exploiter. So they're simply in this protest, these owner operator truckers. And keep in mind, every truck at the protest is private property. There are zero company trucks there. I challenge people to show me company trucks there because if a company driver took their big rig to a fucking protest to block roads, they would probably be arrested and put in federal prison. Keep in mind, this has to do with the Department of Transportation for something like, I don't know, Grand Theft Auto or whatever. So they would definitely be going to federal prison. So I don't see these protesters going to federal prison for stealing fucking big rigs from their company. So these are all privately owned pieces of private property, privately owned capital. So they're using their private property to physically disrupt the capitalist supply chain over personal fears of the COVID vaccine being harmful and their refusal to take it, and for COVID passports for this idea of freedom. Now, how are the truckers labor aristocrats? Well, the labor aristocracy, according to Lenin and what Lenin observed from Engels, is a conservative, idealist, liberal section of the working class with administrative and financial privilege over other workers. So, how are the truckers, and specifically the owner operators, um, labor aristocracy or labor aristocrats? So what happens is they come into a position often where they are working, but because they receive significantly more pay and because they start their own trucking company in which they employ workers on their own capital, they ascend past the stage of a common worker and they become Petit Bourgeois, but they also become labor aristocrats because they fall into the structural hegemonic ideals of liberalism. And I have a perfect quote on this. Engels wrote in the preface to the Conditions of the Working Class in England, workers who are forgiving or workers who are forgiven their being members of the working class because they themselves would like to drown their quality of being workers in the ocean of their liberalism. So what these people are doing is they're chasing the American dream. They're trying to start up Sally and Jimmy's trucking company. They're trying to make it as big as possible. They want their own fleet. And when they're fleeting truckers, they're exploiting the shit out of them. Keep in mind that exploitation is the primary step to profit. And profit in capitalism um, cannot exist without exploitation, especially when it comes to the worker owner relationship. The owner is always going to extract surplus value from the worker via exploitation. And this is very obvious when you look at trucking and when you look at what's called the lack of detention pay, which I'll cover in the next slide. So, why vaccine mandates are good for communists. Now, vaccine mandates actually raise the barrier of entry to trade from simply obtaining a commercial driver's license. You need specifically what's called a commercial driver's license class A in order to drive these cross-country big rigs, and owning one's own truck, to now being forced to take multiple vaccines, to which the protesters believe is actually harmful. So, what the COVID vaccine mandates are doing for us as communists is they are disrupting the global supply chain, which is step number one. If we were to, oh, I don't know, follow the line of a lot of Pat socks, go there, take a kneel, take a bow, kiss the hands of these, a lot of these um, petit bourgeois people, and bow down and take a knee for these people, what we would be doing is supporting global capital, right? Because all we're saying is, hey, we want global capital to just keep flowing and flowing endlessly, and for more workers to just keep being exploited through all of these shitty practices, like not paying workers when they're docked and when they're being loaded. Because when a trucker pulls into a factory or a warehouse port, they have to have their haul loaded into their um, trailer, right? And this can take hours, guys, hours, 4, 5, 6 hours. A lot of the time, especially when it comes to these private companies or these family-owned businesses, you're not getting detention pay. In other words, you're not getting paid hourly for sitting there um, while your truck is being loaded. Even though you are working, even though for a truck driver you are at work, you are in your truck, you are trucking, even though you're being live loaded or live unloaded, you are not being paid. And this is an exploitative practice that so many of these labor aristocrat family owned trucking companies are doing. Do the big companies do it too? Yes, but they do it. The labor aristocrat, small family owned petit bourgeois companies, they don't pay their truck drivers detention pay because they want to compete with the big companies. And that's the fundamental, most rule of Marxism, of the Marxist understanding of capitalism, is that capitalist competition is ultimately going to create crisis, because when you have this endless competition where everyone's just trying to exploit the shit out of each other, it's going to end in a major failure. Now, this protest, or these mandates, excuse me, disrupt capitalist global trade and cause a disruption in the supply chain, which leads to crisis, which is exactly what we want. We want capitalist crisis to occur. If we look at a decade like the 1980s, think about Hall and Oates, think about um, Duran Duran. Think about all of these bands. Think about how happy everyone was in the 80s, right? The reason why everyone was so happy in the 80s is because everyone thought that things were just good, like things were great. There was technology coming out. People were getting, TVs. There was tons of jobs. There was tons of economic growth in the 80s. So that's why the culture of the 80s reflected that. As soon as you got into the 90s and everything went to hell, gang violence went through the roof in 1992 and in 1993 in Los Angeles. Gang violence was just absolutely ridiculous, where pretty much every young teenager was in a gang and violent and doing drugs and often ending up in prison or dead, right? And we all know about the Depression, the Great Recession in the 90s, which destroyed so much of America, right? And then eventually NAFTA came along, etc. So we need crisis. We don't want people to fall into the cultural hegemonic belief of the 1980s that all is well, consumption is great, and we can just dance the night away. And then when recession comes, we need to be there to remind them that the system is inherently broken. So, crisis causes the bourgeoisie to scramble for profits by price gouging and increasing exploitation. If anyone out here thinks that any of these companies, especially like these Russian oil companies or ExxonMobil or Shell or any of these gas companies, are not making a killing from this Russian invasion, you are wrong. These gas companies are price gouging to no degree. When you go to the gas pump, you are not paying for at cost prices, obviously. You're probably paying more, and you're probably giving you actually are giving the Exxon Mobil executives more money right now with a oil shortage and with the price of oil per barrel going up so high. You are actually giving them more profit than you probably were before, right? Judging by their profit, levels. So what happens is, as the capitalist class heightens their exploitation, it encourages workers to lower exploitation by unionizing. Okay? And it doesn't matter, like I've said before, if the union is conservative, it doesn't matter if it's liberal. A union is just going to automatically benefit the working class, because it it creates an artificial shortage of workers, which creates bargaining power for the proletariat. So, basically, in conclusion, appealing to the labor aristocracy about vaccine conspiracies and trying to just keep global trade flowing and trying to return to this picket fence, middle class, labor aristocracy, like so many of these patriotic socialists want to do, is not the answer. That's not the answer, because all it's going to result in is crisis. That picket fence ideal died in the 60s and the 70s too, when recession hit so incredibly hard in the 60s and 70s. And that 50s picket fence ideal of the nuclear family died. And even then, that ideal is ultimately just a capitalist creation if we read um, Origin of the Family from Engels. The actual answer is stopping company driver exploitation and stopping the exploitation of not the Petit Bourgeois, but instead the actual company drivers, the actual drivers who drive for these family owned businesses who don't have ownership of these. Stopping lease purchase agreement drivers from being exploited to hell. That's another key aspect, is the lease purchase agreement exploitation, which basically creates a subsistence relationship with the manufacturer. Okay. Company drivers are forced to drive under the cents per mile system. Now, basically, the cents per mile system, I get like 35 to 65 cents for every mile I drive as a truck driver. If I hit traffic, if I have to stop to do repairs, if I have to fuel my truck, if I have to wash it, clean it, if I have to go to the shop and get it repaired, if I have to dock and get live unloaded or loaded. Like I said, I am not being paid for any of this labor. That is what Marx called absolute exploitation. It's literally just increasing the workday without paying the worker. Um, Truckers are also rarely unionized, so that's one of the aspects that I wanted to see come out of this is the unionization of truck drivers. And they are often denied detention pay, as I have mentioned before. They work long hours, like I said, 11-hour shifts straight. You got to get on, you can take your 30-minute break, you can take your 10-minute break, you can rest your eyes for 5 minutes, but you got to be hauling for 11 hours straight, staring at those lines. A lot of the times, these truck drivers are also forced to do this at night because there's less traffic at night. So their sleep schedule is just, it's destroyed. And it doesn't matter if you get physically used to waking up at night, it's still terrible for your body. Um, and they're also forced to go over the road. They're forced, even though most hauls are actually under 500 miles, they're forced to work long hours and they're forced to go over the road, which basically means they live in their truck for like 3 weeks at a time. Nobody's talking about these issues. What do the patriotic socialists care about? Appealing to owner operator 4 day a week drivers who come home for 3 days a week. They see their family, they kiss their kids. Hey, a lot of over the road drivers who aren't labor aristocrats with private property don't get these kind of privileges. But instead, these people want to shill for um, the petit bourgeois, right? And it's because they push for this Larouchian idea of reindustrialization and creating a new middle class in America. We have to save working families. Well, all you're doing is creating more classes. There's always going to be a lumpen in the West that you are in opposition to, and not only that, you're always going to be exploiting through imperialism. So finally, we need to seek to push company drivers away from the labor aristocracy and liberalism into unionization. So that was my little presentation on why I don't support the truck drivers, why I actually support not only vaccine mandates and vaccine passports, but the draft is another excellent example of things that um, socialists should be pushing for. And all of these ideas, they are not going to. Oh, and another thing I want to address. Oh, but there was a company driver here and there. Yeah, there's a lot of people who believe that the vaccines are like literally poison. They're going to show up. But irregardless, every single truck that you see at that trucker protest, those are not simple middle class working people who are just working hard. These are petit bourgeois exploiters. They do not give a shit about their employees, which is why they practice all of these, unless there's some kind of ethical trucking company. But even then, the chances of them staying afloat or even growing are absolutely pretty much zero when trucking is one of the most exploitative. The reason part of the reason why I know so much about truck driving is because it's one of the best examples of how to show someone what exploitation is, because you can point to tons of truck drivers that literally work for free. So anyway, LT here, and thank you guys for watching. See you guys later. Peace.